In September 1942, the United States Army Air Forces found itself in urgent need of a high-altitude interceptor with an extreme rate of climb to counter potential high-performance enemy bombers. The Fisher Body Division of General Motors proposed a solution that bypassed traditional lengthy development cycles through a composite design philosophy. The core concept was to assemble a Frankenstein fighter using major structural components that were already being mass-produced for other aircraft, theoretically saving years of engineering and tooling time. The initial blueprint for the XP-75 called for the outer wing panels of the North American P-51 Mustang, the tail assembly of the Douglas A-24 Dauntless, and the heavy-duty landing gear from the Vought F-4U Corsair. The engine was to be mounted amidships, positioned behind the pilot in a center-of-gravity arrangement similar to the Bell P-39 Airacobra. This corporate approach to aviation was championed by William Knudsen, the former president of General Motors who had moved into government wartime production. Knudsen believed that the automotive industry's success in swapping chassis and engines between car brands like Buick and Chevrolet could be directly applied to frontline fighter aircraft. Confident in this shortcut, the USAAF signed a letter of intent for 2,500 production aircraft before a single prototype had even been taxied. However, the design quickly began to deviate from the parts bin plan, as engineers realized that components optimized for a dive bomber or a naval fighter did not aerodynamically mesh when forced onto a high-speed interceptor frame. By the time construction of the first prototypes began in early 1943, the P-51 wings had to be scrapped in favor of Curtiss P-40 Warhawk wings, and the fuselage required constant lengthening and reshaping to accommodate the massive cooling ducts needed for its experimental 24-cylinder engine. What was promised as a streamlined assembly of proven parts was rapidly morphing into a complex, unrefined, and overweight airframe that no longer resembled any of its parent aircraft.
The technical superiority of the A6M was centered on the Nakajima Sakai Sakai 12-cylinder radial engine, a compact power plant that produced 940 horsepower. While this output was numerically lower than the 1,000-plus horsepower engines found in the British Spitfire or the German Bf-109, the Zero's extreme weight-saving measures meant it had a power-to-weight ratio that was virtually unmatched in 1941. Weighing only 3,700 pounds empty, the Zero could accelerate and climb with a verticality that shocked Allied pilots flying the much heavier P-40 Warhawk and F-4F Wildcat. This agility was paired with a sophisticated armament suite for its time. Two 7.7mm Type 97 machine guns synchronized to fire through the propeller cowl, and two 20mm Type 99 cannons mounted in the wings. While the machine guns provided high-velocity fire for close-in dogfighting, the 20mm cannons gave the Zero the heavy-hitting capability to destroy the structural frames of larger bombers and rugged naval aircraft. However, the true black magic of the Zero's technical profile was its fuel economy and range. By utilizing a 330-liter external drop tank and an engine tuned for maximum efficiency at high altitudes, the Zero achieved an operational radius of nearly 1,000 miles. This allowed the Japanese Navy to launch fighter escorts from land bases in Formosa to cover bombing missions over the Philippines, a distance so vast that American commanders initially insisted the Japanese must have been operating secret aircraft nearby, as they refused to believe any single-engine fighter could cross such an expanse of ocean and still have enough fuel to engage in a dogfight. The cockpit itself was designed with a large glass greenhouse canopy that provided the pilot with nearly 360-degree visibility, a critical tactical advantage that allowed Japanese pilots to spot and bounce Allied formations before they were even detected.
Every aspect of the A6M2's mechanics was tuned for the offensive, creating a machine that was essentially a flying fuel tank with wings and cannons, designed to strike first and strike from a distance no one thought possible.
By late 1941, the Mitsubishi Zero had achieved a psychological dominance over the Pacific that historians now refer to as the Zero myth. Allied pilots, flying outclassed Brewster Buffaloes and early model P-40s, found themselves trapped in a terrifying reality where the A6M was essentially untouchable in a traditional dogfight. The Japanese Navy's elite pilot corps, many of whom were veterans of the air war over China, utilized the aircraft's low-speed stability to perform vertical loops and tight turns that left Allied formations in shambles. The legend of the Zero's invincibility became so pervasive that the U.S. Navy was forced to issue a formal directive: avoid a dogfight with a Zero. Use high-speed diving attacks and never try to outturn it. This tactical stalemate only began to break in June 1942 during the Aleutian Islands campaign, when a young Japanese pilot, Tadayoshi Koga, was forced to crash-land his A6M2 on the marshy island of Akutan. The aircraft flipped over, killing the pilot, but leaving the airframe almost perfectly intact. When U.S. salvage teams recovered the Akutan Zero, they gained the intelligence coup of the war. Extensive flight testing of the captured Zero revealed the mechanical Achilles heels that Jiro Horikoshi had been forced to accept in his quest for weight reduction. American test pilots discovered that at speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour, the Zero's control surfaces became extremely heavy and difficult to move, a phenomenon known as aerodynamic stiffening. This meant that while the Zero could outturn a Wildcat at 150 miles per hour, it was sluggish and vulnerable at the high speeds used in diving attacks. Furthermore, the lack of self-sealing fuel tanks meant that even a single hit from a .50 caliber incendiary round could turn the Zero's high-octane fuel supply into a massive fireball. Armed with this data, the U.S. Navy developed the Thach weave and boom and zoom tactics, focusing on teamwork and high-speed passes rather than individual maneuvering. By 1943, as the more powerful F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair entered the fray, the Zero was no longer the predator, but the prey. The very design philosophy that made it a legend in 1941, its extreme lightness and lack of protection, became its death warrant. By the final stages of the war, the once-feared legend of 1941 was being used primarily as a kamikaze platform, a tragic and desperate end for what had been the most refined aerodynamic achievement of the early 20th century.